Hi everyone, this is Tim. In this video I wanted to show you the game I played at the chess club this week. Thought it was kind of interesting. To give a little background, I think I have been on a little bit of a decline since the beginning of the year. So starting, say, the middle of last year when I did that Mistakes of an A Player series, I started being a little more consistent and gradually improving, and I got my way up, my rating up. It had dipped below 1800 and I got it up to 1866 by the end of last year. But this year it seems like I've forgotten some of the lessons that I learned from that video series about the blunder check in particular. I had a game I lost to a pretty simple blunder, and in this game I made a couple of mistakes. So I want to go through this game and point out those mistakes and talk about what I can do perhaps to get back into shape. So let's take a look at the game. I start off with d4. My opponent goes d5, and we get a Slav defense, c4, c6. Now my opponent is rated about 100 points higher than me. For this tournament, my rating was 1850, and his rating was 1948. And he's someone I've played several times before, so I'm sort of familiar with this style. So let's see. We go along the main line, knight f3, knight f6, e3. This is going with the slow Slav. The other line is to play the knight up here and potentially allow black to take this pawn and try and hold on to it. But those are complicated lines. There's even lines where black can hold on to the pawn and try and get a queenside pawn majority rolling. So pretty sharp lines. So this is a simpler way to play in some respects, but it also has some aspects to it that can be kind of sharp. So now I develop the knight here. The pawn is securely defended by the bishop. I'm just going to take back there if it gets traded. And now the move I usually play here is bishop to d3, and that leads to the Meran variation where black will take the pawn, and after bishop takes, we'll kick it with b5. And that line can get pretty sharp sometimes. So what I played in this game is not my usual line, but against this particular opponent, he's someone who likes to play sharp lines and is usually very familiar with them. So I wasn't interested in that sort of theoretical duel, you might say. So I went queen c2 here. This is the second choice in this position, and it's known as an Anti-Meran variation. So he went bishop d6, which is the main move. And now, actually, I could just go back to the Meran setup with bishop to d3. This leads to different lines that are similar to the Meran. Black can still take and play b5, although usually he castles first. And but it's not quite as sharp somehow. These extra moves have kind of slowed down the tempo, and both sides get castled, and it turns into an okay game. I wasn't all that familiar with this position, and I wasn't sure if that was going to work or not. So I played a different move. I looked at this in the opening book, and the top choice, though, is bishop d3, as I mentioned. Bishop e2 is also a move, and the funny move g4. So if you want to play a surprise move in this position, g4 has been played, apparently with some success. I guess the idea is after knight takes, you have rook to g8, getting the pawn back immediately. So interesting ideas there. I played the fourth choice, which is b3, and I really wasn't sure if this was in the book or not, but I just calculated as best I could to see if this was going to be punished in some way. And the most forcing line, the one I was worried about here, is bishop b4, pinning the knight, and then the queen coming in and piling up. And notice that the bishop can't be chased away with the pawn move because the rook here is undefended in the corner, so this pawn is pinned. So that was what I was worried about, but I calculated that I would have enough time to get my bishop out. There's also a knight here, adding more pressure to the pin. That's also part of black's plan here. But I calculated I would be okay here after bishop b4. In fact, I am, and the normal move here for black is castles, and then we would stay in the opening book. So just to show what the main line is like from here. After black castles, white plays bishop e2, preparing to castle here. b6, getting the bishop out on this diagonal. Castle, bishop b7, bishop b2. And that's probably enough to give you a little bit of a flavor of the position. This is kind of position I wouldn't mind playing. There's still some tension here that we haven't resolved the issue with these pawns, so there's the opportunity to open up some lines still. Both sides can play for the e-pawn pushes. Black can play for e5 and I can play for e4. So it's not like this is going to be a dull position. I think there's still lots of dynamic possibilities. All the pieces are still on the board, and white has just a little bit more space. So maybe slight edge to white and be okay to play. So playing the main line would be all right for me after b3, so I don't see any reason to avoid it. What my opponent played here, though, was the sharper move, bishop to b4. This is not in the opening book, but it was one that I had to calculate. And so I just went bishop d3. I want to keep his knight out of this square so that any extra tension building up on this knight can be dealt with. I can defend with this bishop and the queen, and I can take his knight with my bishop, and that should hold against everything. So he just decided to castle at this point. I castled. And then he went g6, which is kind of a funny move, but we will see the idea he has later. So I kicked the bishop, and he just traded it off. So I thought, well, I should be doing okay here, and the engine agrees that I have some kind of advantage out of the opening with the bishop pair, a little more space. And also this bishop. It's a light-squared bishop locked in behind this light-squared pawn chain. Kind of a funny setup at first glance. So, but let's go forward. One of his ideas with that trade was he does get this knight on e4, hitting my queen. And I thought for a while about taking his knight off, but I wasn't so happy with the idea of pawn takes, forcing my knight away, and I don't seem to have any easy way to round up that pawn. He can defend it with his knight, and he can kick my knight away, so I don't think I ever win that pawn. And my knight being pushed away from this defensive post on the king side opens up some attacking ideas for him. These pawns on the light squares have opened up some dark squared avenues for his pieces to jump into the game. So there's potential for a king side attack here for black. So I just dropped my queen back to c2, and he played f5. And so I think this is the point of this pawn structures. He wanted to get in this f5 push. And so he's got kind of a something that looks almost like a Dutch defense, a bit delayed. Let's see. I dropped my knight back to d2. I wanted to kick his knight away. Before playing this move, I was a little bit worried about queen to g5, because the idea, the problem with the idea of knight d2 is to play f3 and kick this knight away, and if his queen is on g5, this pawn will go with check. So I was a little bit worried about that. But I decided it was okay, and I checked this later with the engine. So after queen g5, I could play rook e1, and then if he brings the knight up, I can kick it, and his knight would drop back to d6. And we get a similar position to the game, except with his queen out here. But it's just that I have enough time to hold on to that pawn. Of course, he could also take the knight as well, but that's no problem. Okay, so in the game, he didn't go for queen g5. He didn't do anything special to stop that f3 push. He allows it by going knight to f6, bringing this other knight in. That's, so if I trade off his knight, he can come back with a knight and maintain a strong knight there. But my idea was just to chase it off with f3. Although this is weakening my king side a bit, and we'll see where this becomes relevant. His knight drops back to d6, and here's my first mistake. So I've been playing okay for now, but this mistake is a clear oversight, a good example of a miscalculation in a tactical miscalculation, I guess. The move I played here is e4. So if you want to put yourself in my shoes and try and figure out if e4 is a safe move to play, why don't you see if you can figure out what the problem is with it, since I guess I told you it was a mistake already. You know there's a problem there. Okay, yeah, pause the video if you want some time to think about this. It's not like it's simple. But I think you can figure it out if you look at it, or at least spot some of the main ideas. Let's talk about what the engine wants me to play here instead of e4. The engine wants me to play the move bishop to b2. So shoring up this d-pawn before I push on with the e-pawn. And then after these moves, a5, a4. I'm not really sure what this is about, but the chess engine really wants to push these a-pawns forward. I guess both sides are maybe competing for space on the queen side. A5 stops him from playing, a4 stops him from playing b5, and his a5 stops me from playing b4, I guess. Then knight f7 and bishop e2, b6, and then finally, after all of this preparation, e4. So just getting all the pieces set before pushing on with this thematic break. So e4 is the right kind of strategic idea, but of course you can't play it until it works tactically, and it just doesn't really work. And so I think my opponent had figured this out because he seemed really surprised that I played e4. It's like he had done his calculations here and he expected that this wasn't going to work. But I took my time thinking about it, but I missed some points. So let's go and show the key point that I missed. These moves aren't necessarily the best, but let's get to the critical section. He took with the d pawn. I took with the f pawn. He took with the knight. And right here I took back with the knight. And but right here already you should spot the problem. The problem is the queen is looking at this d4 pawn. It comes with check, and it hits the loose rook in the corner. Now, of course, everything is not so simple. Well, I shouldn't say of course. I just everything is not so simple. That's the fact. He doesn't simply win a piece here, even though I played knight takes e4. So what I should probably play at this point is bishop to b2 and just try and hold on to the remaining pawns in the center. And that's probably my best option at this point. But I didn't even notice that my pawn was hanging. So that's so the first mistake I would say is that it's that calculation mistake. When I did the calculation, I was just imagining everything trading off on this e4 square. I was focused on that. He takes, I take, he takes, I take. And at the end of all that, my queen is up here on e4 defending the pawn and everything looks fine. But in that calculation, I didn't look for those intermediate moves. Oh, that suddenly the queen is attacking this pawn. So that's number one. And then my second mistake was when I got to this position, I didn't do the simple blunder check and look for the problem. What happens after queen takes e4 check. Instead, I just continued with the line that I calculated, which is just keep on exchanging onto e4. And so now queen takes d4 is a real threat, although it's not good if it's played immediately. So that's why I said it's not so simple. So first of all, it's black's turn to move here, and I wanted to show why he didn't play queen takes d4, which is pretty tempting at first glance. But if you take the pawn, I can block with the knight, and if you grab the rook in the corner, black is momentarily up the exchange. He gave up a piece here, remember? He gave up the knight. So I have 3 pieces and he has 2 minor pieces. But he got a whole rook. But the problem is this move bishop to b2. And his queen is actually trapped and has nothing better than to give itself up for the other rook. So he gave up a queen and a piece for 2 rooks. And that's just not a good trade. It comes out materially better for white. But what he could have played right here is instead of taking with the knight, he could take with the pawn, and f takes e4. For one thing, if I take back now, he's not down a piece, and he can come in here and grab the pawn and the 2 rooks. So let's just show this line. If I take, he can just come in here with the check, and in fact, it's actually a bit worse. If I move the king out of check, it leaves this rook undefended, so I can't even trap his queen. So what I have to do is I have to block with my queen. And then we get these trades, and he ends up a piece up at the end of all this because he grabs the bishop. So that's really bad. So in this position, after pawn takes on e4, I have to play some crazy tactical move like bishop to h6. Oh, this makes a lot of sense. It connects the rooks. And so now this check here is not so dangerous, just wins a pawn, and his rook is hanging. And the line continues from there. Let's see. Well, the engine gives pawn takes. I guess I'll show this. It's kind of interesting. Pawn takes bishop, so he gets that piece. But the queen comes over here to f2, and that's the other point of bishop h6, is it sets up this battery and actually a mate threat on f8 there. And the rook is hanging. So rook to f7 to get away from the bishop, and then bishop to g5 here, attacking the pinned knight. then let's see, the line continues with queen b6. I guess I'll show the rest of it. But the point is I get my piece back. And he can push on with e5. And I can defend here. Takes. And we get some trades just to take it all the way down to the final position here. He could trade off another pair of rooks. But this is a position where black is a pawn up. So black is going for the win. It's an advanced passed pawn. But the bishops are of opposite color, so I have good chances to draw this. So my blunder, even with best play, it wasn't necessarily losing the game, but I have to count it as a blunder anyway, because I should have noticed, and when I was calculating, that this pawn was exposed to an attack from the queen. It goes with check. That's number one, and then number two, I should have done the blunder check at this point. Even if I didn't notice it in my calculation, I should have noticed it at this point. What happened in the game was I just retook automatically like I'd been planning, just exchanging out on e4. And now it's black's turn to move. And in this position, while black was thinking, I realized that this pawn was hanging. And I started calculating those lines with trapping the queen with bishop e2 and stuff like that. And fortunately for me, my opponent was thinking of these lines too and decided not to take. And he didn't notice this pawn takes e4 line, which is winning. Instead, he just kept taking. And now, realizing that this pawn going with check was a problem for me, I didn't continue taking. My original plan was to take, pawn takes, queen takes, but he can interrupt that with the queen check again. So I just defended the pawn, defended the d4 pawn, and he just retreated his knight. So black has won a pawn. That was all that happened there. I pushed the e4 pawn forward. He took it, I took back, he grabbed that pawn, and after a couple of trades, we get to this position, and I never got that pawn back. My plan was to trade off this pawn on that square, the f pawn on the e4 square. But we didn't get that far because I spotted this other tactic and had to change plans. So here I am, and I'm a pawn down. But the funny thing is about this position is that white is better. And I didn't realize this immediately, but after a couple moves, or after staring at the position for a while, I began to think, it's not so bad. Now, of course, if you're down a pawn in a game, you want to treat it like a gambit anyway and get what compensation you can out of it. But in fact, I really have more than enough compensation. And it persists for a long time. It's not due to any specific tactical line. It's kind of a general feature of the position that I'm just a little bit better, and it lasts for a while. I think the main reason is that it's because his light-squared bishop is blocked in by this pawn chain. Also, I have the bishop pair, which is a long-term advantage. And then I have all these open lines because I've given up those two pawns. I have open lines for the rooks and the bishops. And his king is a bit exposed. So this pawn chain does two harms. It blocks in the bishop, and it opens up lines towards his king. Whereas my missing pawn, aside from the fact that I'm down material, has opened up lines for my bishops and for my rooks to come in and attack him. So it's kind of interesting and a very lucky turn of events for me, I have to be honest. Okay, so I played Rook AE1. Like I said, there is no immediate forcing line, but I have time because this positional advantage persists for a while. I have time to organize an attack. And so I just started moving my pieces over towards the king side. Queen f2, went queen c7, getting his rooks connected, his queen off the back rank, and queen h4. And now I'm starting to think of tactical ideas involving hitting this knight here with my bishop and pushing this d4 pawn forward with tempo. Let's see. He stops me by playing rook ae8, and this is an interesting maneuver. Now if I play d5 here, he can play e5, supported by the rook and the queen. That blocks this diagonal of my bishop, so his knight's still safe, and that should be fine. In fact, if he gets these pawns rolling, then the advantage will shift in black's favor. So I have to be very careful at this point to not give away the advantage. And still, there's no immediate sort of breakthrough move that I could find here, and the chess engine didn't find one either. So I have to continue maneuvering, but continue it in a way that maintains my advantage. So anyway, I settled on the move rook e2, doubling on the e file. He went to bishop c8. The bishop got out of the way, by the way, so that the rook could come over, and then it retreated back to c8. I think that's a reasonable plan. the bishop on c8 is out of the way of the queen, and so the queen has open lines, the rooks have open lines, and the bishop is still looking out in this direction for when these pawns go forward, and it supports this pawn. Supports the backwards e-pawn, which he doesn't want to give up. So not a bad play from black either. Let's see, I double on the e-file like I was planning. It comes in with knight g4. Now we see some of black's attacking ideas in this position. The queen on c7, coordinating with the knight with the mate threat. Notice that if I play h3 now to chase the knight away, then queen h2 is mate immediately. So I cannot move that pawn. So whatever I do, don't touch the pawn. The queen here is a key piece supporting, defending these squares, and at the same time attacking. So actually it's doing a great job right here at the moment. And here's my second mistake in the game. And like the first one, it involves a pawn push. And it also, well, I don't want to give away too much. My mistake was pushing with d5. You know, I just thought this was my chance to start breaking through. I have a pin on the d file at the moment, so I thought that was looking pretty good. But once again, I failed to calculate the other responses besides taking the pawn. So if you want to figure out what I overlooked here, you can pause the video here and see what black should play after I go d5. Okay, well, first of all, once again, I'm going to talk about what the engine says I should play instead of d5, because I want to try and learn how to play these positions better. It's once again, the chess engine doesn't want to break through, but to continue some kind of maneuvering. So it wants to push the pawns forward on the queen side, starting with b4. And then it actually gives this move. These are best moves from both sides according to the chess engine. So maybe black doesn't have a lot of useful moves here. Bishop to c2. I mean, it looks like a bit of wasted time that bishop just went to c8 and then, I mean, yeah, c8 and back to d7. Kind of funny. Rook to f7. More defense along the 7th rank there. Bishop to c1. b5 now, trying to maybe expand on the queen side. c5, a5. So going after this, the b pawn here, bishop to b3, counterattacking on e6 there. Although the engine doesn't take there, it goes like this. First, well, it's black's move, takes, and then black retreats the knight, and white plays bishop to f4 rather than grabbing the pawn. Maybe there's a problem tactically with that. Anyway, I just wanted to show this position because the engine has not tried to grab any material. I think that's kind of interesting, and it's just continuing to maneuver with the two bishops and try and get them in the best possible squares. And this is a really dominating looking piece at the moment. There's a powerful bishop here controlling all of these dark squares and taking advantage of the weaknesses that black has created here. So that's how the chess engine wants to play this position. It's a difficult way for me to play. You know, I'm always looking for those breakthrough moves, and really this is more of some careful maneuvering, and improving your pieces is the best way to play it. Okay, so let's go back to the game. I played d5 here, and once again, it's like I had a blind spot on this diagonal. And he has queen b6 check here. Let's see. Well, he took first, which is okay. And then at this point, he could have played queen b6 and gotten a pretty good game. Although I have to say that it's not easy to calculate these lines. In fact, there's a couple different lines the chess engine has according to whether the king goes to h1 or to f1. So if I went to h1, then the best line according to the engine is to take the pawn. And if I go to f1, then the best line according to the engine is to take this pawn, the pawn on b6, which is kind of the more natural pawn to take, the pawn on b3, hitting my loose bishop here. But the funny thing about it is this is only a good move if the king is on f1, and if the king is on h1, it's not a good move. And I can't really explain the difference. I just wanted to mention it, that there's actually lines where white is better after king h1 and queen takes pawn. So maybe he calculated some lines. Maybe he saw it was all too complicated and didn't like what he was seeing. You know, if you are in a position and you see a continuation which you think is good, but it's kind of murky and you're not sure what's going on, versus a continuation that looks simple and winning. Maybe even if it's not winning as much, it's just but it's simpler to play. Then you're going to go for that continuation, and I think that's what happened here. My opponent played the move rook to d8, and at first I thought, oh wow, that's a strong move. It definitely looks good on the surface. It pins this pawn, so I'm no longer threatening to take here, and because my loose bishop is here. But there is a flaw with this move, this rook d8 move, and there's one really strong move that white has that I actually managed to find. So it wasn't like my brain was totally on the blink during this game. It was just I have these weaknesses of missing my opponent's counterplay moves. But there's a really strong move that white has here. So if you want to pause the video, see if you can figure out the move for white in this position. Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. I played bishop to c4. So I just unpinned that pawn. And what he was probably thinking is that in case of bishop c4, he would just take that pawn and drive my bishop away again. And he still has this check in reserve. The check hasn't gone away. But if you look at this a little deeper, you will notice that this pawn is pinned. The reason it's pinned is that if he takes here, I'm not going to take back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to play rook to e7 and threaten checkmate here and threaten the queen. So the rook on e7 is a killer piece. And this just wins material for me. In fact, I'm winning no matter what he does. So he stopped at this point and thought for a long time and could not find anything. The best line according to the chess engine is just actually to retreat, to move this rook here and then allow me to take a pawn. And then I'm just winning here. Now I have, all I've done is equalize the material, that's true. So, but the reason I'm winning is twofold. I have the bishop pair and I have this really strong passed pawn here. So this is the best play for black, but white has a winning edge here. He probably didn't like that. Once again, you don't want to give your opponent a simple winning plan. So he tried something more complicated. He went with b5. And this has a flaw in it, so if you can see what move I played here, is another good chance for you to guess the move. Well, this is a nice example of pause the video if you want to time to think about it. I'm going to give the answer away now. This is a good example of ignoring a threat by making a bigger threat. You know, he's threatening to attack my bishop. I don't want to take. He just has this queen check that'll get the bishop back, and that'll win the bishop. Yeah. So, but I can make a bigger threat by taking on e6, and the threat is this fork. So he needs to do something about that. But what can he play here? There's there was one other point here. The other thing he might have considered is pushing this pawn forward. Let's see, instead of b5. He might have considered pushing this pawn forward to try and shut down this possibility of me taking that pawn. But then I have this pawn forward with check. So, and that the pawn hits the queen, and that just wins the queen. So anyway, he tried b5 here, like I said, hitting my bishop. So now if I try anything tricky like this, even if there's a check, he can take my bishop. Well, in this case, there's no check because his pawn is still here. So, but I take here, and my threat is to advance with the forking those two rooks, and there's no way to really stop this. And the pawn advances with check once again. So, he can't block. My queen conveniently is covering that square. And if he does a nothing move, or even if he moves one of the rooks, say moves a rook in front of it, I push this pawn forward with check. He grabs my bishop, I grab the rook. So this is basically winning no matter what he does. He tried taking the bishop immediately. I pushed on to e7, forking the two rooks. He threw in the check now, queen c5 check. I went to f1. I could have gone to h1. I looked at it later. h1 would have been okay too, but I was still kind of a little nervous about this square here. There's tactics with the queen and the knight on that square with the king in the corner. There's smothered mates and things like that. And I wanted this rook to be free to move. So I wanted to have the queen and the king guarding the f2 square. Anyway, this turns out to be okay for me as well. He moved his rook in front of the pawn. I had to choose which rook to give up. So I take the other rook. He took back with the rook. And now I have the move rook to e7. That's what I'd been angling for a while. And you can see all my pieces have now come to life. This bishop is a monster. This rook here is coordinating with the queen, threatening mate. It's just all over. If he does nothing, notice that I have the idea of, well, say for example, if he pushes the pawn forward to prevent my queen from coming in and delivering mate, I have the idea of rook to g7 check. The king has to go to the corner, and then I have rook back to c7 with a discovered check on the king, and the rook hitting his queen. So that wins the queen. So there really is no defense here at all. He tried blocking with the rook, but I just take it off. He takes back. I come in with the queen check, and he resigns. Once again, it's this bishop on the long diagonal, and it's the dark squares. He put his pawns on like squares, and the dark squares have done him in. And notice that all three of my remaining pieces are coordinating to deliver the final mate. He only has one move, and then it's queen g7 checkmate, and it's the rook that's cutting him off, and the bishop that's cutting him off, and the queen that delivers the mate. So a very nice finish to an interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and leave any comments you have in the section below. I will see you again soon. Bye.